Alrighty then. This lecture module is part of our series on regulatory capture. This example is British Petroleum, the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So we're gonna look at how that happened and how regulatory capture helped create this environmental disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, this book, Lindsay and Tellis 2018, is filled with examples of regulatory capture. And if you're interested in the environment, here's a classic, a new edition of a classic by Anderson and Leal, Free Market Environmentalism for the Next Generation. If you're interested in non-rent-seeking regulatory capture solutions to voluntary exchange solutions to any environmental problems we might be having. Okay, so let's get to it. Regulatory capture, British Petroleum, Deepwater Horizon example. So the players here are the Department of Interior, Congress, and people drilling for oil in the Gulf of Mexico. So the way it works then is the Department of Interior gets appropriations from Congress. In return, gives Congress information about its activities. One of the responsibilities of the Department of Interior is to regulate drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. So in order to regulate drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, the Department of Interior needs information. The more that the Secretary of the Department of Interior regulates, the larger they can grow their discretionary power, their regulatory power, their monopoly on coercion, the more they can tell Congress that they're doing, and then the more money that Congress then gives to the Department of Interior, and then therefore then the more that the salary of the Department of Secretary of Interior can make. These, of course, are just reductio ad absurdum arguments to make a theoretical point and learning heuristic, but that's pretty much how it works, these types of self-interested relationships. That's called public choice economics. So in the Gulf of Mexico, so what in return does the Department of Interior give British Petroleum in return for the information that the Department of Interior needs to give Congress so that they can increase and expand their budget? And this, again, of course, explains how government can grow, is this type of public choice relationships. It's important to drink a lot of water during the coronavirus. So what does Department of Interior give to those they regulate in return? And this is under a Republican administration, right? The Republican administration special interest groups are oil and gas, where the Democrats are clean and green, right? It's the special interests that they pander to instead of treating everyone equally under the law. So what they give in return is liability limits. So the Republicans give just say, for example, $10 million liability limit. In other words, to encourage people to drill in the Gulf of Mexico, they say you're only liable for if something goes wrong, you're only liable for $10 million. So then, therefore, how much does British Petroleum invest into, instead of using their own self-interest to minimize their downside risk, and ensure that their safety procedures are correct, they don't do that because now they have liability limits. They don't have an incentive to minimize the downside risk. So that they're only going to spend this much on ensuring safety at their Deepwater Horizon drilling platform, because that's all that they're going to be liable for. So then, of course, something goes wrong because they're not minimizing their downside risk, and you get the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Because of regulatory capture, unintended consequences, social crisis, and environmental disaster. So then, and here the story continues, then the Democrats get elected into office, and the new Secretary of the Department of Interior says, I will put I will put my boot on the neck of the chairman of British Petroleum until they make everyone whole for all of the problems. So all of these many lawsuits, I think about 10 or 15 billion dollars finally in lawsuits, even, and a lot of fraud in this. Companies that weren't even operating at the time in the Gulf area received compensation under this virtue signaling on behalf of the Democrats. So anyway, that completes our. And so what happens when you have a very important government official saying, "I will put my boot on the neck of one of the largest companies of the world"? Well, that giant sucking sound you hear is capital investment not coming to the United States. Anyway, that completes our regulatory capture lecture module on British Petroleum, Deepwater Horizon environmental disaster due to regulatory capture. Thank you.